The morning sun felt cold against my skin, even though June in Chicago meant the city was usually buzzing with warmth. But that day, nothing could warm my heart. I woke up alone, my birthday ignored, just like the many before. The silence in my apartment was so thick I could taste it, bitter like the coffee I'd forgotten to sweeten. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. I sat at my small kitchen table, the same one where I'd fed my children breakfast for 20 years, where I'd helped with homework, where I'd celebrated promotions and dried tears over heartbreaks. The wood was worn smooth from decades of use, but now it felt foreign under my fingertips. My routine had become exhausting in its loneliness: wake up, check my phone for messages that never came, make coffee for one, stare out the window at the brown line trains carrying people to their important lives while I remained invisible in mine. The scent of old books and lavender still clung to every corner of my sixth-floor apartment. These smells were my comfort, inherited from a lifetime of loving others more than myself. But today, there was something else in the air, something bitter and sharp that made my chest tight. It was the scent of betrayal, though I didn't know it yet. In my trembling hands, I held a piece of paper that had arrived the day before. Not a birthday card, not even a simple "thinking of you" note. It was a formal letter from my daughter Sarah's law firm. "We should discuss your care plan," it read in cold, professional language. No mention of my 75th birthday. No mention of the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise her, to put her through law school, to be there every time she called crying about her marriage, her career, her children. I closed my eyes and let myself drift back to birthdays when they mattered. I could still smell the apple cinnamon from my homemade pies, still hear the laughter bouncing off the dining room walls when the whole family gathered around our old oak table. My granddaughter Emma would sit in my lap, her little fingers tracing the wrinkles on my hands while she whispered secrets about school and friends. Those memories felt like photographs in a dusty album now, beautiful but untouchable, faded with time and neglect. The contrast between what I expected and what I received had become the defining pattern of my later years. I expected gratitude and got indifference. I expected inclusion and got silence. I expected love and got duty visits that felt more like obligation than affection. The gap between my hopes and reality had grown so wide that I'd almost stopped hoping altogether. But let me tell you how I got here, because this story didn't begin with that cold birthday morning. It began decades earlier, with a young mother who believed that love meant giving everything of yourself until there was nothing left. I had always been the one who fixed things. When my husband Tom lost his job during the 2008 financial crisis, I didn't just comfort him, I became the breadwinner overnight. I took 3 part-time jobs, cleaning offices downtown before dawn, watching the neighbors' children in the afternoons, and stocking shelves at the grocery store on weekends. My days started at 4 in the morning and ended when my body finally collapsed into bed near midnight. "Mom, you're always working," Sarah would say when she was in high school, but it wasn't gratitude I heard in her voice. It was annoyance, as if my exhaustion was somehow inconveniencing her. She never said thank you for the clothes I bought her with money earned scrubbing floors, never acknowledged the missed sleep that paid for her college textbooks. I remember the night she graduated from law school. The ceremony was beautiful, held in one of those grand university halls with soaring ceilings and stained glass windows. I sat in the back, wearing the same dress I'd worn to every important event for the past 5 years because I couldn't afford a new one. All the money had gone to her education, her books, her apartment near campus. When she walked across that stage, I felt a mixture of pride and emptiness, proud of what she'd accomplished, empty because I knew I'd given away pieces of myself to make it happen. After the ceremony, she hugged me briefly and said, "Thanks, Mom," but she was already looking over my shoulder at her friends, at the life she was moving toward that wouldn't include me except when she needed something. The pattern established itself early. When Sarah got married, I paid for the flowers because it would mean so much to have them be perfect. When she bought her first house, I helped with the down payment because family helps family. When her first child was born, I took unpaid leave from my job to help with the baby because grandmothers are supposed to do these things. Each time, I told myself this was what love looked like. This was what good mothers did. They gave until it hurt, then kept giving. My son Michael was different but somehow worse. Where Sarah demanded, he simply disappeared. He moved to Seattle after college and called once a month, always when he was driving somewhere, always with the rushed tone of someone checking a box. "Hi Mom, just wanted to check in. How are you?" "That's good. Listen, I'm about to go into a meeting, but I'll call you soon." Soon never came. When I got sick with pneumonia 3 years ago, spending a week in the hospital, Sarah visited once and complained about the parking fees. Michael sent flowers with a generic card. But Anna, my neighbor from across the hall, brought me soup every day for 2 weeks after I got home. Anna, who barely knew me, who owed me nothing, cared more about my well-being than my own children. The financial exploitation was subtle at first. $100 here for Sarah's car repair, $50 there for Michael's emergency. Then it escalated. Sarah's law practice had a cash flow problem, could I help? Michael's startup needed investors, could I contribute to his Kickstarter? Their requests always came with emotional manipulation wrapped in family obligation. I wouldn't ask if I had anyone else to turn to, Sarah would say, her voice breaking in just the right places. You know I'd do the same for you. But I knew she wouldn't, because I'd never asked. I'd been raised to believe that asking was weakness, that good mothers solved problems, they didn't create them. Over the years, I emptied my savings account, cashed in my pension contributions, even took out a small loan against my apartment. My net worth, built carefully over decades of work and sacrifice, evaporated into their needs and wants. I told myself it was an investment in their happiness, in our relationship. I was buying their love, though I wouldn't admit it for years. The wake-up call should have come when Sarah suggested I sell my apartment and move somewhere smaller. You don't need all this space, she said, walking through the rooms where she'd grown up, dismissing my life with a wave of her manicured hand. The money could help you be more comfortable. What she meant was that the money could help her be more comfortable, could fund her children's private school tuition and her husband's golf club membership. But I wasn't ready to see the truth yet. I was still clinging to the belief that family meant unconditional love, even when the love only flowed in one direction. The microaggressions started small and grew larger, like cracks in a foundation that eventually bring down the whole house. Forgotten phone calls on my birthday. Cancelled dinner plans when something better came up. Holiday invitations that arrived as afterthoughts, spaces saved grudgingly at the children's table while Sarah's in-laws sat with the adults. I began to notice how my children spoke to me differently than they spoke to others. With me, their voices carried impatience, condescension. They interrupted me, dismissed my opinions, treated my concerns as neurotic overreactions. But with their friends, their colleagues, even strangers, they were respectful, attentive. The isolation crept in slowly. My old friends had moved away or passed on. My social circle had shrunk to the grocery store clerks who knew my name and Anna from across the hall. My world became smaller and smaller until it was just me and the television and the hope that maybe tomorrow the phone would ring with genuine affection instead of another request. I started having conversations with myself, practicing what I might say if they actually asked how I was feeling. But they never asked, and my rehearsed responses remained unspoken, echoing only in the chambers of my heart. The Christmas before my 75th birthday was the beginning of the end for my old self. Sarah invited me to their celebration, but when I arrived, I found myself relegated to a corner chair while she bustled around playing the perfect hostess for her husband's family. I sat there for 4 hours, included in no conversations, acknowledged only when someone needed me to watch the children or help in the kitchen. During dessert, I heard Sarah's mother-in-law ask, "Who's the old woman in the corner?" My own daughter, my flesh and blood, responded, "Oh, that's just my mom. She doesn't have anywhere else to go. Just my mom." As if 35 years of labor and love could be reduced to that dismissive phrase. As if I were a piece of furniture that had outlived its usefulness but was too expensive to throw away. I left early that night, claiming I was tired. Nobody tried to stop me. Nobody asked if I was okay when they saw tears in my eyes. I took the Red Line home through the snowy Chicago streets, surrounded by strangers who showed me more consideration than my own family. That winter was the longest of my life. The silence from my children stretched for weeks between duty calls. My granddaughter Emma, now 16, was too busy with her teenage life to visit her boring grandmother. The apartment felt like a tomb, four walls holding a life that no longer seemed to matter to anyone. I found myself checking my phone obsessively, hoping for a message, a sign that I was still loved. But the screen remained dark except for spam calls and appointment reminders. The loneliness was a physical thing, sitting on my chest like a weight that made breathing difficult. It was during one of these long, dark evenings that I stumbled upon something that changed everything. I was going through old papers, trying to organize my affairs in case something happened to me, when I found a folder Sarah must have left behind during one of her visits. Inside were printed emails between her and Michael, discussing me like I was a problem to be solved. "Mom's getting more needy," Sarah had written. "We need to start making decisions about her care before she becomes a burden." Michael's response was even colder, "Can't we just put her somewhere? I've got too much going on to deal with this." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. My own children, discussing nursing homes behind my back, treating me like an inconvenience they needed to hide away. They weren't concerned about my well-being, they were concerned about their reputations, their comfort, their freedom from obligation. I sat on my couch that night, staring at those printed emails until the words blurred together. A lifetime of sacrifice reduced to planning my disposal. All those years of putting their needs first, of emptying my bank account for their dreams, of babysitting their children and listening to their problems, none of it had earned me even basic respect. The teacup slipped from my hands without warning, shattering on the hardwood floor in pieces too small to repair. I stared at the fragments, seeing my own broken trust reflected in the china. This was my moment of awakening, though I didn't recognize it yet. This was when the old Margaret began to die and something stronger began to take her place. I cried that night, but they were different tears than I'd shed before. These weren't tears of sadness or loneliness, they were tears of rage. Rage at being taken for granted, rage at being dismissed, rage at myself for allowing it to happen. I cried until there were no tears left, until my body was empty of everything except a strange, new feeling, determination. For the first time in decades, I looked in the bathroom mirror and really saw myself. Not as Sarah's mother or Michael's mother or Tom's wife, but as Margaret. Just Margaret. A woman who had lived 75 years, who had learned and loved and lost and survived. A woman who deserved better than she was getting. I spent the next several nights awake, staring at the ceiling and thinking. The emails had revealed something I'd suspected but never wanted to acknowledge. My children saw me as an obligation, not a person. They were managing me, not loving me. And I had been complicit in this arrangement, accepting scraps of attention because I was afraid of getting nothing at all. But what if nothing was better than scraps? What if being alone was better than being tolerated? The idea terrified me, but it also excited me in a way I hadn't felt in years. What would happen if I stopped playing my assigned role? What would happen if I stopped being the grateful, undemanding mother who existed only to serve others' needs? I began to notice things I'd previously ignored. The way Sarah's voice changed when she talked to her clients versus how she talked to me. The way Michael's social media was full of posts about work friends and adventures that never included me. The way Tom had started treating me like a roommate he no longer found interesting. The nursing home packet arrived a week before my birthday, express mail with Sarah's law firm's return address. Professional, efficient, final. She had researched facilities, compared costs, even scheduled a tour for the week after my birthday. All without consulting me, as if my opinion about where I spent my final years was irrelevant. The facility she'd chosen was clean but sterile, affordable but impersonal. A place where inconvenient elderly parents could be safely stored while their children got on with their real lives. The photographs showed smiling staff members and organized activities and residents who looked medicated into contentment. I called Sarah after I received the packet, my hands shaking as I dialed her number. "Oh good, you got the information," she said before I could even speak. "I think Sunset Manor is perfect for you. They have bingo on Tuesdays and movie nights on Fridays. You'll love it." "Sarah," I began, "I don't want to live in a nursing home." "Mom, be reasonable. You're getting older. What if you fall? What if you forget to take your medication? We're doing this because we love you." Love. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. If you loved me, you would have asked what I wanted. Don't be dramatic. This is what's best for everyone. Everyone except me, I thought but didn't say. Not yet. I wasn't ready for that confrontation yet, but I could feel it building inside me like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. My birthday morning arrived with cruel sunshine, the kind of bright June day that makes everything look happy from a distance. I woke up expecting nothing and still managed to be disappointed. No calls, no cards, no acknowledgement that 75 years ago, I had entered this world full of hope and possibility. I made coffee and toast, the same breakfast I'd eaten alone for 3 years since Tom moved to the assisted living facility upstate. The silence in my apartment was complete except for the distant rumble of the Brown Line and the muffled sounds of my neighbors starting their days. At noon, my phone finally rang. "Sarah. Happy birthday, Mom," she said, but her voice was distracted. I could hear papers shuffling, the sounds of her office in the background. "Listen, I've scheduled the tour of Sunset Manor for Thursday. The administrator wants to meet you, discuss your care needs. Not, how are you feeling? Not, what do you want to do to celebrate? Just the business of disposing of me, wrapped in the language of caring. I don't want to tour the facility, Sarah. Mom, we've been over this. You can't live alone forever. What if something happens? What if something happens to you? Should I put you in a home?" The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. When she spoke again, her professional lawyer voice was firmly in place. "That's completely different and you know it. I have responsibilities, a career, children to raise. And I had all those things too, once. But I guess my 40 years of responsibility don't count for anything. Don't guilt-trip me, Mom. This is hard enough without you making it about your feelings." My feelings? As if they were selfish indulgences instead of valid human emotions. As if 75 years of life had earned me nothing but the right to be managed by people who found me inconvenient. I hung up without saying goodbye, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I had never hung up on one of my children before. The act felt rebellious and terrifying and strangely liberating all at once. The rest of my birthday passed in silence. Michael never called. Tom sent a card from his facility, but his handwriting was shaky and I wasn't sure he remembered what day it was. Emma, my granddaughter, sent a text, HBD Grandma, with a heart emoji. The abbreviated greeting somehow hurt more than no message at all. That evening, I sat in my kitchen as the sun set over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded me of better times. I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion and poured myself a glass. If my 75th birthday wasn't special enough for good wine, what was I waiting for? As I sipped the wine and watched the city lights come alive outside my window, I made a decision. I wasn't going to Sunset Manor. I wasn't going to be managed and controlled and put away like an embarrassing family secret. I was going to take back my life, even if it meant losing the little I had left of my family relationships. The decision felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating. I had no idea what came next, but for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. Anna knocked on my door around 9 o'clock, carrying a small chocolate cake with a single candle. "I couldn't let your birthday pass without celebration," she said with her gentle smile. 75 years deserves recognition. We sat at my kitchen table, two women who had become friends through proximity and shared understanding rather than blood obligation. Anna listened as I told her about the nursing home papers, about my children's plans for my future, about my growing realization that I had been enabling my own mistreatment. "You know," Anna said, cutting us each another slice of cake, "my daughter lives in Oregon. She calls every Sunday, visits twice a year, never asks for money. The difference between us is that I taught her early that love is reciprocal. You taught your children that mothers exist to give." Her words stung because they were true. I had created the dynamic that was now suffocating me. By never setting boundaries, by never expecting anything in return, I had trained my children to see me as a resource rather than a person. "But it's not too late," Anna continued. "You can change the rules of the game, even now." That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I slept deeply and dreamlessly. No anxiety about phone calls that wouldn't come, no rehearsing conversations that would never happen. Just rest, pure and complete. I woke up the next morning feeling different, as if the act of deciding had physically altered me. The apartment looked the same, but everything felt new. I was seeing my life through different eyes, and what I saw was not as bleak as I had thought. I called the bank first, asking to freeze the automatic transfers to Sarah and Michael's accounts. The customer service representative was helpful and professional, treating my financial decisions with respect. What a revelation it was, being spoken to like a competent adult instead of a confused elderly person who needed managing. "I'd like to make some changes to my account access as well," I said, feeling braver with each word. "I want to remove the joint account holders." "Of course, Mrs. Patterson. You'll need to come in to sign the paperwork, but we can have everything ready for you this afternoon." This afternoon. Not next week when it was convenient for everyone else. Not pending approval from my children. Today, because I was a grown woman with every right to control my own money. The walk to the bank felt like a pilgrimage. Every step took me further from the woman who had allowed herself to be diminished, closer to someone I barely remembered, the Margaret who had once been strong enough to work 3 jobs, smart enough to manage a household budget, brave enough to stand up to her boss when he tried to cheat her out of overtime pay. The bank lobby was cool and quiet, filled with the soft sounds of business being conducted with dignity and respect. I sat across from a young woman who called me Mrs. Patterson and looked me in the eye when she spoke. She didn't rush me, didn't make me feel foolish for changing my mind about financial arrangements that no longer served me. "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" she asked after I'd signed the paperwork removing my children's access to my accounts. "Actually, yes. I'd like to open a new savings account. Something that only I can access." Excellent choice. Many of our customers find that having separate savings gives them peace of mind. Peace of mind. Such a simple phrase, but it described exactly what I was seeking. Not wealth or luxury or even comfort, just the peace that comes from knowing your choices are your own. I walked home feeling lighter than I had in years, despite the weight of what I knew was coming. My children would not take these changes well. They had grown comfortable with my compliance, my availability, my financial generosity. They would fight to maintain the status quo that served them so well. The first call came that evening. Sarah's voice was tight with controlled anger. "The bank called me today. They said you removed me from your account. I hope this is some kind of mistake." "It's not a mistake," I said, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "I decided I no longer need help managing my money." "Mom, don't be ridiculous. You're 75 years old. What if you forget to pay bills? What if someone takes advantage of you?" The irony was not lost on me. She was worried about strangers taking advantage of me while she had been doing exactly that for years. "I've been managing money since before you were born, Sarah. I think I can handle it." "This is about the nursing home, isn't it? You're being spiteful." "Spiteful? As if wanting control over my own life was a character flaw. As if decades of generosity could be erased by one act of self-preservation. This is about respect, I said. And dignity. Two things I haven't gotten from you in a very long time. The silence stretched between us, filled with years of unspoken resentments and unmet expectations. When Sarah spoke again, her voice had shifted to the tone she used with difficult clients, professional, distant, threatening. Fine. But don't come crying to me when you can't handle living alone anymore. And don't expect us to bail you out when you run out of money because you're making emotional decisions instead of practical ones. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me with the dial tone and the echo of her words. But instead of feeling hurt or frightened, I felt free. She had shown her true colors, revealed that her concern for my welfare was conditional on my compliance with her plans. Michael called the next day, his voice carrying the careful frustration of someone who had been designated to clean up a family mess. Mom, Sarah tells me you're having some kind of episode. Are you feeling okay? Maybe we should have you checked by a doctor. An episode. As if asserting my independence was a symptom of declining mental health rather than a sign of returning self-respect. I'm feeling better than I have in years, I told him honestly. But I don't expect you to understand that. Look, I live across the country. I can't be dealing with family drama right now. Just do whatever Sarah thinks is best, okay? She's looked into all this stuff. Sarah thinks is best. Not what I think is best. Not what any reasonable person might think is best. Just Sarah, who had made herself the decision-maker for a life she had never lived. Michael, I said, when was the last time you asked me what I wanted? About anything? The question seemed to confuse him. I could hear him breathing, rustling papers, probably multitasking even during this conversation about his mother's life. I don't know what you mean, he said finally. I know you don't. That's the problem. I hung up gently, without anger. There was no point in being angry with someone who genuinely couldn't understand why I might want agency in my own life. Michael had been absent for so long that I was essentially a stranger to him, a character in the story of his family rather than a real person with real needs and feelings. Over the next few days, the pressure mounted. Sarah called repeatedly, leaving increasingly urgent messages about how I was making a mistake and being selfish. Michael sent a series of texts expressing his disappointment in my irrational behavior. Even Tom called from his facility, his confused voice asking why the children were upset and couldn't we all just get along. But there was one voice that supported me, Anna's. She would stop by every evening with tea and quiet conversation, listening as I worked through my feelings and fears about the changes I was making. Change is hard at any age, she told me one evening as we sat watching the sunset from my window. But it's especially hard when the people around you benefit from things staying the same. Her words helped me understand why my children were fighting so hard against my newfound independence. My compliance had made their lives easier for so long that they couldn't imagine any other arrangement. They weren't necessarily evil or unloving, they were simply accustomed to a relationship that served their needs without requiring them to consider mine. But understanding their motives didn't change my determination to live differently. If anything, it strengthened my resolve. I had spent too many years making their lives comfortable at the expense of my own happiness. It was time to try a different approach. The tour of Sunset Manor had been scheduled for Thursday, and I decided to go, not because I was considering living there, but because I wanted to see exactly what my children thought was appropriate for my future. I wanted to understand their vision of my remaining years so I could make an informed decision about whether to accept it. The facility was exactly what I expected, clean, safe, and utterly soul-crushing. The residents I saw looked medicated into contentment, sitting in common areas staring at television screens or sleeping in wheelchairs. The activities Anna had mentioned, bingo and movie nights, felt like distractions from life rather than engagements with it. The administrator, a cheerful woman in her 40s, walked me through the daily routine with practiced ease. Meals at set times, medications dispensed by staff, activities planned and supervised, bedtime enforced for everyone's safety and comfort. It was a life completely managed by others, with no room for spontaneity or personal preference or the simple dignity of making your own choices. Your daughter speaks very highly of you, the administrator said as we concluded the tour. She's very concerned about your welfare. You're lucky to have such a devoted child. Lucky. If Sarah was devoted, it was to the idea of me that served her purposes, not to the actual person I was or the life I wanted to live. When would you like to move in? The woman asked, pulling out a calendar. We have an opening next month. I don't, I said simply. Her smile faltered. I'm sorry? I don't want to move in. I'm not interested in living here. The confusion on her face was almost comical. Clearly, she was used to dealing with adult children who made decisions for their parents, not with elderly people who still had opinions about their own lives. But your daughter said, she's already put down a deposit. A deposit. Sarah had put down money to hold a spot for me, had made financial commitments based on decisions I hadn't been allowed to participate in. The presumption took my breath away. My daughter will have to get her deposit back, I said. I won't be needing your services. The walk home from Sunset Manor felt like a victory march. I had seen my future according to Sarah's plan, and I had rejected it. The knowledge that I still had choices, that I still had power, filled me with energy I hadn't felt in years. But I knew the real confrontation was still ahead. Sarah would not accept my decision gracefully, and the family tension that had been building would eventually explode into something that couldn't be ignored or smoothed over. The explosion came the following Sunday. Sarah arrived at my apartment unannounced, her face flushed with anger and her voice tight with controlled rage. The nursing home called me, she said before I could even invite her in. They said you refused the placement. Have you completely lost your mind? I found it, actually, I replied calmly. For the first time in years, I'm thinking clearly. You're thinking selfishly. Do you have any idea how much stress you're causing everyone? Michael can barely focus at work, Tom is confused and upset, and I'm trying to manage my own family while dealing with your tantrum. Tantrum. As if wanting control over my own life was childish behavior instead of basic human dignity. Sit down, Sarah, I said, gesturing to the couch. We need to have a conversation we should have had years ago. She remained standing, her arms crossed defensively. I don't have time for one of your guilt trips, Mom. I have real problems to deal with. Real problems. As if my life, my feelings, my future weren't real enough to warrant her attention. Then let me make this simple, I said, feeling a calmness descend over me that I'd never experienced before. I will no longer allow you to make decisions about my life without consulting me. I will no longer provide financial support without clear agreements about repayment. And I will no longer accept being treated like a burden in my own family. Sarah's mouth opened, then closed. She seemed genuinely shocked that I was capable of setting boundaries. You can't be serious, she said finally. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Mom, you're being unreasonable. Families help each other. That's what we do. Help goes both ways, Sarah. When was the last time you helped me with anything besides planning my disposal? The word disposal hit her like a slap. Her face reddened, and for a moment I saw not my successful lawyer daughter but the petulant child she had once been when she didn't get her way. That's not fair, she said. Neither is planning my future without my input. Neither is treating me like an ATM for 20 years. Neither is making me feel grateful for scraps of attention from my own children. We love you, Mom. No, I said, the word coming out stronger than I felt inside. You love what I do for you. You love my availability, my money, my willingness to put your needs before my own. But you don't love me enough to respect me. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stared at me as if I had become a stranger, as if the mother she knew had been replaced by someone unrecognizable. In a way, I had been. Fine, she said finally, her voice cold as winter air. If that's how you feel, maybe you should handle everything yourself. Don't call me when you need help, because I won't be available. She left without saying goodbye, slamming the door behind her with enough force to rattle the pictures on my walls. I stood in the sudden quiet of my apartment, listening to her footsteps echo in the hallway as she walked away from me, possibly forever. Instead of the devastation I expected to feel, I felt something else entirely, relief. The confrontation I had dreaded for so long was over, and I had survived it. More than survived, I had stood up for myself in a way I never had before. But the family drama was far from over. Within hours of Sarah's departure, my phone began ringing with calls from relatives I barely heard from, each one expressing concern about my mental state and unreasonable demands. Sarah had mobilized the extended family to pressure me into compliance, painting me as an unstable elderly woman who needed to be managed for everyone's good. The campaign against me was coordinated and ruthless. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years called to lecture me about family loyalty. Tom's sister sent a concerned email about how my erratic behavior was affecting Tom's health. Even Emma, my granddaughter, called in tears asking why I was being mean to Mom. Each conversation was designed to make me doubt myself, to convince me that I was the problem, that my desire for autonomy was selfishness, that my refusal to be managed was a sign of declining competence rather than returning strength. But something had shifted in me during that confrontation with Sarah. Their words still hurt, but they couldn't shake my conviction that I deserved better than I had been getting. For the first time in my adult life, I trusted my own judgment more than I trusted others' opinions of me. The pressure campaign reached its peak when Michael flew in from Seattle, supposedly to check on me but actually to add his voice to the chorus demanding my compliance. He arrived with Sarah and sat in my living room like they were staging an intervention for a drug addict. Mom, Michael said, his voice carefully modulated to sound reasonable and caring, we're really worried about you. This isn't like you at all. Maybe that's the problem, I replied. Maybe the old me wasn't working very well. The old you was a wonderful mother and grandmother, Sarah interjected. But now you're being stubborn and hurtful, and it's affecting everyone. Affecting everyone. Always everyone except me. My feelings, my needs, my desires were never part of the equation when family decisions were made. I want to ask you both something, I said, looking from one to the other. When was the last time either of you did something purely because you thought it would make me happy? Not because I asked, not because you needed something from me, but just because you wanted to show me love. The question hung in the air between us. I watched their faces as they processed what I was asking, saw the moment when they realized they couldn't answer. That's not the point, Sarah said finally. It's exactly the point, I replied. Love that only flows in one direction isn't love. It's exploitation with better packaging. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mom, that's not fair. We've both been busy with our own lives, but that doesn't mean we don't care about you. Caring and showing care are different things, Michael. I've spent 75 years learning the difference. The confrontation continued for another hour, with my children taking turns trying to convince me that their version of love was sufficient, that their plans for my future were the only reasonable option, that my resistance was hurting everyone who mattered. But their arguments only strengthened my resolve. Finally, Sarah played what she thought was her trump card. Fine, Mom. If you want to be alone so badly, you can be alone. But don't expect us to come running when you fall down those stairs or forget to take your medication or run out of money because you're making emotional decisions instead of practical ones. The threat was clear: comply or be abandoned. Accept their version of care or receive no care at all. It was emotional blackmail in its purest form, the kind of manipulation I had been subjected to for years without recognizing it. I understand, I said quietly. And I accept those terms. The shock on their faces was almost worth the pain of the moment. They had expected me to cave under pressure, to choose their conditional love over no love at all. They couldn't comprehend that I might prefer solitude to surveillance, independence to imposed dependency. They left that evening with promises to let me think about what I was throwing away, but I could see in their eyes that something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer the compliant mother they could count on to absorb their demands and convert them into grateful compliance. I had become someone they didn't recognize, someone who required actual relationship skills rather than simple expectation management. The weeks that followed were the loneliest of my life, but also the most peaceful. My phone stopped ringing with requests for money or favors or free babysitting. My calendar emptied of obligation visits and guilt-inducing family events. For the first time in decades, my time was entirely my own. I used that time to rediscover who I was when I wasn't defined by others' needs. I took long walks through Lincoln Park, joined the book club at the library, started taking a painting class at the community college. I cooked meals I actually wanted to eat instead of whatever was cheapest or most likely to please others. Anna continued to be a steady presence, stopping by for tea and conversation without agenda or expectation. Her friendship helped me understand what healthy relationships looked like: mutual interest, reciprocal caring, respect for boundaries, joy in each other's company without the weight of obligation or manipulation. You seem lighter, she observed one evening as we watched the sun set over the lake. Like you've been carrying something heavy for so long that you forgot what it felt like to stand up straight. She was right. The constant tension of trying to earn love through service had been lifting slowly, replaced by something I barely recognized: self-respect. I was beginning to like the woman I was when I wasn't trying to please everyone else. But my transformation was far from complete. The real test came 6 months later, on Thanksgiving, when Sarah called with what sounded like a genuine apology. Mom, she said, her voice soft and uncertain, I've been thinking about what you said. About respect and love flowing both ways. Maybe we could try again. Would you like to join us for Thanksgiving? Part of me leaped at the invitation, desperate for any sign that my children still wanted me in their lives. But a stronger part of me remembered the pattern: brief moments of seeming remorse followed by returns to old behaviors once they had secured what they wanted. What's changed, Sarah? I asked. I don't know what you mean. I mean, what's different about how you see me, how you treat me, how you value my opinions and feelings? Because an invitation to a meal doesn't erase months of treating me like a problem to be managed. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if she had hung up. When she spoke again, her voice carried a note of irritation that revealed the apology for what it was: a strategy rather than genuine remorse. I'm trying to be nice here, Mom. I'm trying to include you. But if you're going to analyze every gesture, I'm going to consider the context of every gesture, I corrected. That's what people do when trust has been broken. Fine. Forget I called. She hung up, and I sat holding the phone, feeling the familiar mixture of sadness and relief that had become my response to family contact. They wanted the old Margaret back, the one who was grateful for any attention, who accepted any treatment as long as it came with the label of family love. But that Margaret was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own worth. The real shock came a few days later, when I discovered Sarah's latest manipulation attempt through a social media post I wasn't supposed to see. Anna's daughter, visiting from Oregon, showed me a Facebook post Sarah had made about her difficult mother, who was pushing the family away with unreasonable demands. The post was carefully crafted to generate sympathy for Sarah while making me look like an ungrateful, mentally declining burden. It painted her as the long-suffering daughter trying to care for an increasingly impossible parent, and me as someone whose judgment could no longer be trusted. Reading that post, seeing how she had twisted our story to make herself the victim and me the villain, was like receiving a final education in who my daughter really was. This was emotional manipulation at its most sophisticated, using public shame to pressure me into compliance while building a narrative that justified any future actions she might take. But instead of the devastation I might have felt months earlier, I felt something else: pity. Pity for a woman so invested in being seen as the good daughter that she couldn't recognize how her public complaints revealed her own character defects. Pity for someone so uncomfortable with genuine relationship that she had to create a villain to justify her own behavior. I didn't respond to the post. I didn't defend myself or correct her narrative. I simply acknowledged that this was who she was, this was how she operated, and I deserved better than to have my private family struggles broadcast for public sympathy. That social media post was the final gift Sarah gave me, the gift of complete clarity about who she was and what our relationship had become. It freed me from any lingering hope that she might change, any remaining guilt about the boundaries I had set, any doubt about whether I was doing the right thing by protecting myself. Spring came early to Chicago that year, and with it came a sense of rebirth I hadn't experienced since I was young. I found myself making plans beyond the next day or week, signing up for a painting workshop that met for 6 months, booking a trip to visit an old friend in Denver, even considering adopting a small dog for company. The painting class was particularly transformative. Sitting in that bright studio with a dozen other older adults, focused on color and light and the simple pleasure of creation, I remembered who I had been before marriage and motherhood consumed my identity. I had loved art in high school, had dreamed of studying it in college before practical concerns and family expectations redirected my path. My teacher, a gentle woman in her 60s named Catherine, encouraged us to paint from emotion rather than trying to copy reality exactly. "Let the canvas tell you what it needs," she would say. "Trust your instincts." Trusting my instincts was something I was still learning to do after decades of deferring to others' judgment. But with each brushstroke, each decision about color and composition, I practiced the small acts of self-trust that were rebuilding my confidence in my own perceptions. The painting I was most proud of was an abstract representation of a sunrise emerging from darkness, swirls of deep blue and purple gradually giving way to gold and orange light. When I looked at it, I saw my own emergence from the long night of trying to earn love through service into the dawn of self-acceptance. "That's beautiful," Anna said when I showed her the finished piece. "It feels hopeful." Hopeful. Yes, that was exactly what I was feeling for the first time in years. Hope that my remaining years could be lived on my own terms, for my own joy, in relationships that nurtured rather than depleted me. The trip to Denver was another milestone in my journey toward independence. I hadn't traveled anywhere for pleasure in over a decade, always too worried about the expense, too concerned about being away when my family might need something, too convinced that my own desires were selfish luxuries. But now, booking that plane ticket felt like an act of self-respect. I was choosing to spend my money on my own happiness, to take time away from my routine without asking permission or worrying about what others might need in my absence. My friend Rita met me at the airport, and seeing her face light up at my arrival reminded me what it felt like to be genuinely welcomed. We had been college roommates 40 years earlier, and though we had lost touch during the years when I was consumed by family obligations, we had recently reconnected through social media. "Margaret," she said, hugging me tightly, "you look wonderful. Different. Stronger somehow." We spent 3 days walking through Denver's art museums, sitting in coffee shops talking about books and politics and dreams we had abandoned and found again. Rita listened to my story without judgment, shared her own struggles with family expectations and the challenge of defining yourself in your later years. "It's funny," she said as we sat in her garden on my last evening there, "how we're taught that aging means becoming smaller, needing less, accepting whatever scraps of attention we're offered. But I think it's the opposite. I think getting older means finally having the courage to take up the space we deserve." Taking up space. I had spent so much of my life trying to be smaller, less demanding, more convenient for others. The idea that I could expand, could claim room for my own needs and desires, felt revolutionary. Flying back to Chicago, I looked down at the lights of the city spreading out below and felt a sense of homecoming that had nothing to do with the apartment waiting for me. I was coming home to myself, to the woman I had always been underneath the layers of other people's expectations. But my transformation wasn't yet complete. There was still one more test waiting, one final confrontation that would prove whether my new strength was real or just another temporary rebellion. The test came in the form of Emma, my 17-year-old granddaughter, who appeared at my door one evening in tears. Seeing her standing there in her school uniform, her face streaked with mascara, brought all my grandmother instincts roaring back to life. "Grandma," she sobbed, throwing herself into my arms, "everyone's so mad at me, and I don't know what to do." I held her, feeling the familiar tug of wanting to fix everything, to absorb her pain and convert it into comfort. But I also felt something new, wariness. I had learned too much about family manipulation to accept any emotional scene at face value. "Come in," I said gently. "Tell me what's happening." As Emma told her story between sobs, I began to recognize the familiar patterns. She had gotten into trouble at school, lied to her parents about it, and been caught. Now she was facing consequences: no prom, no car privileges, extra chores to work off the money her deception had cost the family. "I thought maybe I could stay with you for a while," she said, looking at me with hopeful eyes. "Just until they calm down. You always understand me better than they do." And there it was, the attempt to use me as an escape route from accountability, to exploit my love for her to avoid facing the consequences of her choices. Even worse, I could hear echoes of her mother's voice in her words, the same manipulative techniques wrapped in declarations of special affection. "Emma," I said carefully, "I love you very much. But I can't help you avoid facing the consequences of lying to your parents." Her face changed immediately, the vulnerable child replaced by someone harder and more calculating. "I thought you'd be different," she said. "I thought you'd be on my side." "Being on your side means helping you grow into someone who faces her mistakes honestly, not hiding from them. You're just like Mom," she spat, her tears suddenly dry. "All you care about is rules and being right. You don't really care about me at all." The words stung because they were designed to, because they targeted the exact vulnerability that had made me susceptible to manipulation for so many years, my desperate need to be seen as loving and understanding. But I had learned something important over the past year. Real love sometimes meant disappointing people, setting boundaries, refusing to enable behavior that wasn't in their long-term best interests. The grandmother who would have taken Emma in, hidden her from her parents' anger, enabled her avoidance of responsibility, wouldn't have been helping her at all. "I care about you enough to tell you the truth," I said. "And the truth is that you made a mistake, lied about it, and now you need to face the consequences. Running away won't solve anything." Emma stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her cycling through the emotional manipulation techniques she had learned from watching her mother. But I remained calm, unmoved by her attempts to make me feel guilty for refusing to rescue her. "Fine," she said finally, her voice cold as winter wind. "I see where your priorities are." She left as dramatically as she had arrived, and I knew she would report back to Sarah that even Grandma had turned against the family. I would be painted as the heartless grandmother who refused to help her granddaughter in her time of need. But sitting alone in my apartment after Emma's departure, I felt proud rather than guilty. For the first time in my life, I had recognized manipulation for what it was and refused to participate in it, even when it came from someone I loved deeply. That night marked the completion of my transformation from someone who enabled dysfunction in the name of love to someone who loved enough to maintain healthy boundaries. It was the hardest lesson I had ever learned, but also the most liberating. The months that followed brought a kind of peace I had never experienced. My relationships with my children remained strained, but the constant anxiety about pleasing them had lifted. I no longer checked my phone obsessively or rehearsed conversations with them or lost sleep worrying about their approval. Instead, I focused on building a life that brought me joy. I joined a hiking group for seniors, started volunteering at the animal shelter, took up photography, and even began writing in a journal about my experiences. Each new activity was both a celebration of my freedom and a declaration that my life had value beyond what I could provide for others. The hiking group was particularly meaningful because it connected me with other people who had discovered later in life that they were stronger and more adventurous than they had given themselves credit for. We explored forest preserves around Chicago, sharing stories and encouragement as we walked trails that challenged our assumptions about what older adults could accomplish. My favorite hiking companion was a woman named Dorothy who had left an abusive marriage at age 68 and moved to Chicago to be near her supportive sister. "People told me I was too old to start over," she said as we walked through a particularly beautiful stretch of woodland. "But I'd rather be alone and free than together and miserable." Her words resonated with something deep in my own experience. I might have lost my family relationships, but I had gained something more valuable: respect for myself and the right to live according to my own values and desires. The photography hobby grew out of my hiking adventures, as I began capturing images of the natural beauty I was discovering around the city. Looking through a camera lens taught me to see details I had previously missed, to notice light and shadow and composition in ways that made the familiar world new and interesting. But more than that, photography taught me to trust my own vision. When I looked through the viewfinder, what I saw was what mattered. I didn't have to take pictures that pleased others or captured what they thought was important. I could document my own experience of beauty, create my own artistic interpretation of the world around me. One of my photographs, a sunrise over Lake Michigan with the Chicago skyline silhouetted against the golden light, won third place in a local photography contest. Seeing my name in print, receiving recognition for something I had created purely for my own pleasure, filled me with a pride I hadn't felt in decades. Anna was there when I got the call about the contest, and she hugged me with genuine delight. "I'm so proud of you," she said. "Not just for winning, but for becoming the person who could create something worth winning with." Becoming the person. Yes, that was exactly what had happened. I had become someone I barely recognized from the woman who had woken up alone on her 75th birthday, devastated by her family's indifference. I had become someone who valued her own opinion, who created beauty instead of just consuming it, who chose joy over obligation. But the most profound change was in how I viewed my past. Those decades of service to my family, once a source of pride that had curdled into resentment, I now saw differently. I had been a good mother and wife, but I had confused goodness with self-sacrifice. I had thought that love meant disappearing, that caring meant never having needs of my own. Now I understood that the healthiest love leaves room for both people to grow, to have opinions, to make choices. The love I had given my family had been generous but unbalanced, creating dependency rather than strength, obligation rather than genuine affection. The seasonal change from fall to winter that year felt different than in previous years. Instead of dreading the long months of cold and darkness, I found myself appreciating the quiet beauty of snow-covered streets, the cozy warmth of my apartment, the extra time indoors for reading and painting and writing. I had also begun to attract different people into my life, people who appreciated rather than exploited my generosity, who gave as much as they received in our friendships, who saw me as a whole person rather than just a source of services or support. Besides Anna and my hiking friends, I had connected with people in my painting class, formed genuine friendships built on shared interests and mutual respect. These relationships were lighter but somehow deeper than the family connections I had lost, free from the weight of history and expectation that had made loving my children feel like carrying a burden. Christmas came and went without the usual family obligations, but also without the usual disappointment. Instead of cooking for people who barely acknowledged my efforts, I volunteered at a community dinner where my help was needed and appreciated. Instead of buying expensive gifts for family members who never seemed satisfied, I donated to charities that aligned with my values. On Christmas morning, I woke up alone but not lonely. I made myself a special breakfast, opened a single gift I had bought for myself, a set of professional quality paintbrushes, and spent the day working on a new painting while listening to classical music. The painting was of my apartment filled with morning light, capturing the sense of sanctuary and peace my home had become now that it was truly mine. Looking at the finished work, I realized I had created something that represented not just where I lived, but who I had become. Spring returned to Chicago with unusual warmth, bringing an energy and optimism that matched my internal transformation. I found myself making plans again, signing up for a summer photography workshop, planning another visit to Rita in Denver, even considering taking a class in Italian since I had always wanted to learn another language. The woman making these plans bore little resemblance to the one who had once asked permission before spending her own money, who had organized her entire life around others' convenience, who had measured her worth by how much she could give away. But the most significant change was internal. I no longer woke up each morning with the anxiety of wondering whether this would be the day someone needed something from me that I couldn't provide. I no longer checked my phone hoping for attention that never came. I no longer felt responsible for managing other people's emotions or solving their problems. Instead, I woke up curious about what the day might bring, interested in my own thoughts and experiences, content with my own company. The loneliness that had once felt like a constant ache had been replaced by solitude that felt like a gift. One morning in late May, almost exactly a year after that devastating 75th birthday, I received a call that tested how complete my transformation really was. It was from a social worker at Tom's assisted living facility. "Mrs. Patterson," she said gently, "your husband has been asking for you. His condition has been declining, and I think it would be good for you to visit." Tom. I had almost forgotten about him in the drama with my children, had let our relationship fade into the background of more urgent conflicts. But he was still my husband of 47 years, still the man who had shared most of my adult life, still someone who deserved better than abandonment. The drive to his facility took me through neighborhoods I hadn't seen in months, past places where we had lived and worked and raised our children together. I felt a complex mixture of emotions, sadness for what we had lost, guilt for my neglect, but also clarity about what I could and couldn't give. Tom didn't recognize me at first when I walked into his room. The man who had once been my partner in dreams and struggles looked fragile and confused, worn down by the progression of his dementia. But when I said his name, something flickered in his eyes. "Margaret," he said uncertainly. "Is it really you?" "Yes, Tom. I'm here." We sat together for an hour, mostly in comfortable silence. He couldn't follow complex conversations anymore, couldn't remember what had happened between us or why I hadn't visited sooner. But he seemed peaceful in my presence, holding my hand with the gentle affection that had characterized the best parts of our marriage. When I left, I promised to visit more regularly, and I meant it. But I also understood that my care for him would be different now, bounded by my own limits, honest about what I could sustain, free from the guilt that had once driven me to give beyond my capacity. Tom's condition was a reminder that life is finite, that the time we have for joy and growth and authentic connection is limited. It reinforced my determination not to waste another day trying to earn love from people who were determined not to give it, not to sacrifice the present for the false promise of future appreciation. Summer brought unexpected developments in my family relationships, though not the reconciliation I might once have hoped for. Sarah began what she clearly intended as a campaign to win me back, but her efforts revealed how little she understood about the changes I had made. She started with small gestures, a card for my birthday, flowers delivered to my apartment, invitations to family events extended with exaggerated enthusiasm. Each gesture was accompanied by hints about how much she missed me, how much the family needed me, how things could go back to normal if I would just be reasonable. But I could see through these attempts now, could recognize them as more manipulation dressed up as affection. She wasn't missing me, she was missing what I had provided. She wasn't offering genuine relationship, she was offering the return to the old dynamic where I gave and she took. "I don't think you understand what's changed, Sarah," I told her during one of her calls. "I'm not angry with you anymore, but I also don't want to return to the way things were." "But we're family," she said, as if that explained everything. "Family should be the people who treat you best, not the people who get away with treating you worst because they share your DNA." The conversation ended with her frustration and my calm certainty that I had made the right choices. I wasn't trying to punish her, I was simply protecting myself from returning to patterns that had made me unhappy for so many years. Meanwhile, my new life continued to expand and flourish. The photography workshop introduced me to techniques and perspectives I had never considered, challenging me to see familiar subjects in fresh ways. The Italian class was harder than I expected but deeply satisfying, giving me a sense of intellectual growth that I hadn't experienced in decades. Most importantly, I had begun to write seriously about my experiences, not just journaling but crafting essays about family dynamics, aging, and the challenge of maintaining identity within relationships. Writing gave me a way to process what had happened to me and potentially help others who might be struggling with similar issues. One of my essays, about the difference between being alone and being lonely, was published in a local magazine for older adults. Seeing my words in print, knowing they might reach someone who needed to hear them, felt like the ultimate validation of my journey toward authenticity. The essay generated several letters from readers who shared their own stories of family manipulation and late-life liberation. These connections with strangers who understood my experience were more meaningful than any reconciliation with family members who remained invested in seeing me as I used to be rather than who I had become. As my 76th birthday approached, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed in just 12 months. The woman who had awakened alone and forgotten the previous year bore almost no resemblance to the person I was now, confident, purposeful, surrounded by chosen family who valued rather than exploited my presence. This year, I decided to celebrate properly. I planned a small party with Anna, my hiking friends, and my painting class companions. We gathered in my apartment, which I had redecorated with bright colors and plants and my own artwork, transforming it from a place of isolation into a welcoming sanctuary. Looking around at the faces of people who knew and liked me for who I was rather than what I could provide, I felt a completeness I had never experienced even during the supposedly happiest times with my blood family. These relationships were built on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than obligation and expectation. As we shared cake and conversation, Anna raised her glass in a toast. "To Margaret," she said, "who taught us all that it's never too late to choose yourself." Choosing myself. Yes, that was exactly what I had done, and it was the best decision I had ever made. The final test of my transformation came, unexpectedly, through Emma. Now 18 and about to start college, she reached out with what seemed like a genuine attempt at adult conversation rather than teenage manipulation. "Grandma," she said when she called, "I've been thinking about what happened last year, about what you said, and I think I understand better now." I listened carefully, alert to any signs of the emotional manipulation I had learned to recognize, but her voice carried a different quality, more mature, more honest. "I was really angry at you for not letting me stay with you when I was in trouble with Mom and Dad," she continued. But this year, when I got in trouble again, I handled it differently. I told the truth, faced the consequences, and it actually worked out better. I'm proud of you for that, I said, and meant it. I want to apologize for some of the things I said to you. And I want to ask if we can start over, but as adults this time. The conversation that followed was the first real relationship moment I had experienced with any member of my family in years. Emma was still young and still learning, but she was approaching me with respect rather than expectation, looking for connection rather than rescue. We made plans to meet for lunch, just the two of us, to continue building this new kind of relationship. I was cautiously optimistic but also realistic. One conversation didn't erase years of learned patterns, but it was a beginning. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my transformation had created space not just for healthier boundaries, but also for healthier connections. By refusing to accept poor treatment, I had made room for people to treat me well if they chose to do so. Now, as I sit by my window watching another Chicago sunset, exactly 2 years after that devastating 75th birthday, I can honestly say I am happier than I have ever been. Not because my life is perfect or because all my relationships have been repaired, but because I finally understand my own worth. The woman who once measured her value by how much she could give away now measures it by how authentic she can be. The woman who once feared being alone now cherishes her solitude. The woman who once begged for scraps of attention now attracts genuine friendship. I lost some relationships by setting boundaries, but I gained something more valuable: self-respect. I disappointed some people by refusing to absorb their problems, but I discovered my own capacity for joy. I stopped trying to earn love and learned to recognize it when it was freely given. The past is no longer a source of regret but a foundation for wisdom. Every difficult experience taught me something about my own strength, about the difference between connection and codependence, about the courage required to choose authenticity over approval. My apartment, once a place of exile, has become a haven filled with art I created, books I chose, plants I tend, and memories I'm still making. My calendar, once empty except for duty visits and obligation calls, is full of activities I enjoy with people who appreciate my company. Most importantly, I wake up each morning with curiosity about what the day might bring rather than anxiety about who might need something from me. I go to sleep each night with gratitude for the life I've built rather than resentment about the life I've given away. To anyone listening who recognizes themselves in my story, let me tell you this: you deserve respect, always. You deserve to have your generosity appreciated rather than expected. You deserve relationships where love flows both ways, where your needs matter as much as everyone else's. It's never too late to choose yourself, to set boundaries, to say no to treatment that diminishes your dignity. Yes, some people will be upset when you stop accepting poor treatment. That's how you know the boundaries were necessary. The family relationships you lose by demanding respect weren't healthy relationships anyway. The people who truly love you will rise to meet your standards, will learn to appreciate rather than exploit your kindness, will want you to be happy even if your happiness requires them to change their behavior. Change is frightening at any age, but it's especially terrifying when you've spent decades in familiar patterns, even painful ones. But I'm here to tell you that the fear of change is worse than change itself, that the life waiting on the other side of your boundaries is more beautiful than you can imagine. You have permission to want more than survival. You have permission to expect kindness from the people who claim to love you. You have permission to invest in your own joy with the same energy you've always reserved for others' comfort. The years you have left, whether it's 5 or 25, belong to you. Spend them on people who value your presence, activities that bring you satisfaction, dreams you've deferred too long. Stop waiting for permission to live fully in your own life. Have you ever lived something like this? Have you ever felt like you were giving everything and getting nothing in return, like your family loved what you did for them more than who you were? Have you ever wondered if it's too late to change patterns that have defined your relationships for decades? Please share your story in the comments below. Your experience matters, your voice deserves to be heard, and your journey towards self-respect might inspire someone else who needs to hear that change is possible. And if you found strength in my story, if you recognized yourself in my struggles or my transformation, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps me continue opening my heart, keeps these stories alive for others who need to know they're not alone in their struggles or their strength. Remember, love yourself enough to demand better, trust yourself enough to know what you deserve, and be brave enough to choose authenticity over approval. The life you save by setting boundaries might be your own, and it's worth saving. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for seeing me, not as someone's mother or wife or caretaker, but as Margaret, a woman who learned, finally, that she was worth fighting for.